So it looks like the overarching sentiment from our first video on the iPhone 16e is, why is this phone so expensive starting at $599, especially when you compare it to its predecessor, quote unquote, which was the iPhone SE at $429, right? And that's what I want to kind of challenge you about. Think of this not as a new iPhone SE, but think of this as a budget-friendly iPhone 16, and that's where it's going to be in the lineup, because I would compare this much more to the iPhone 16 versus the iPhone SE. The iPhone SE was kind of its own product category, and Apple, by naming it the iPhone 16e, has made it known that this is part of the iPhone 16 lineup and not part of the iPhone SE lineup. So with that in mind, I do want to go over all the things that you're kind of losing out on when comparing it to the iPhone 16 and see where Apple's able to cost cut to reduce the iPhone 16 price down to the iPhone 16e price, which is going to be a $200 difference. So think about it that way and don't think about it as a new iPhone SE, and then you start to realize why it is a $599 iPhone. But before we continue, definitely consider subscribing to the channel because we will be getting one of these next week, and I'm excited to kind of put it through its paces and give you guys a full review on whether or not this is going to be the right phone for most people or for some people. And let's get right into exactly what some of the differences are, and let's start off with the display itself. If you look at the displays side by side, you do see that the bezels are just a little bit thicker on the new iPhone 16e, and I would kind of compare it to maybe what the iPhone 13 and 13 mini had, where the bezels were a little bit thicker comparatively to the iPhone Pro models. And even to this day, the iPhone 16 has thicker bezels than the iPhone 16 Pro, and that's going to be true also down to the iPhone 16e, but they did go with an OLED display versus an LCD display, albeit it's still at 60 Hz, but the OLED display is technically, in my opinion, a little bit better than an LCD display, especially for battery consumption. So that is one thing to note that might be a check for the iPhone 16e versus the 16. Some other cost-cutting differences that you're going to see is going to be from the brightness levels. You have an 800 nit brightness on the 16e versus 1000 nits of brightness on the iPhone 16 as a standard brightness. Then you have 1200 for HDR on the 16e versus 1600 for HDR. And then for peak brightness on the regular 16, it gets up to 2000 nits of peak brightness, versus on the 16e, it doesn't really have an outdoor moniker or peak brightness level, it kind of stays at that 1200 nits of brightness. And lastly, as you saw from all the videos, that this is going to be a notch going back to the old kind of moniker and the old kind of design language, and it's not going to have a dynamic island, which depending on who you are, you could see this as a good thing or a bad thing or an old thing versus a futuristic thing. I for one prefer that dynamic island just a little bit, but I can also see how it's, at the end of the day, functionally, it's all the same thing. But now we're going to see exactly what it means from an animation standpoint with applications that are so used to the dynamic island versus the notch. So now let's talk cameras, because I think this is where Apple saved the most amount of money, because on the rear you only have one 48 megapixel sensor on the iPhone 16e, and it's going to be their Fusion camera sensor, so it is going to be probably Apple's latest and greatest overall, if you do compare apples to apples, no pun intended, but it is going to have that same crop-in 2x telephoto lens, which is basically just cropping into the middle 12 megapixels of the same 1x photo lens. So digitally or in with software, it will say it's 2x telephoto, but in reality it's all the same camera. Versus with the iPhone 16, you do have that second sensor, which is going to be that ultra-wide camera, which to begin with is something that I don't really use too often unless we go into macro mode, which is something that is going to be missing from the iPhone 16e. So if you like to take up those close-up shots of bugs or of grass or just get really close into fabric and things like that, unfortunately you will not be able to have a macro mode on the iPhone 16e versus every other iPhone in the current 16 lineup. That also means there's no cinematic mode, so if you are used to using that bokeh effect and that portrait mode in video, that's not going to be there. And then finally, there will be no action mode either. So these are all things that Apple kind of cut out as a cost-cutting situation from both a software and hardware standpoint on the rear camera. And then lastly, with the camera, there is going to be no camera control button on this phone. So again, that could be part of Apple Intelligence or the camera feature. I use the current camera control button on my iPhone 16 Pro Max as a shortcut to access the camera. I very rarely use things like visual intelligence, but for right now, there is no camera control button to be used on the iPhone 16e, although there is an action button, which is going to be nice to have. So now, when it comes to internals and Apple Intelligence and things of that nature, it will have the same exact A18 chip, albeit with one less GPU core. So take that with a grain of salt. It is going to be much faster than, the previous iPhones of the iPhone 11. Like it kept saying, that's going to be 80% faster from a GPU and 40% faster from a CPU perspective, again, compared to the iPhone 11. So you will see a substantial upgrade, especially if you're coming from, let's say, the A13 Bionic, which was used in the last iPhone SE. Some other internal things to take into consideration is that you're only going to get Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 7 on the newer iPhone 16 models. So depending on if you have the correct router, you could have less support for faster Wi-Fi and more secure Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi 6 is still going to be plenty for pretty much anybody that buys this phone. And then there's going to be no thread network or no ultra wideband when it comes to 5G connectivity and their modem, and I think this has to do with the new C1 chip that they've implemented because Apple is building their own 5G chip in-house, and it's going to be in this iPhone. Now, it's still going to have 5G, it's still going to have low band and mid bands, and be able to have 5G speeds. It just won't get to those crazy speeds that we used to see in those kind of testing grounds where you get a gig or maybe up to 2 gigs of download speeds on the ultra wideband, but it will still have 5G, of course. And we definitely will be testing exactly how the 5G works, maybe compare it to the Qualcomm version of it, which is in the current iPhones, so definitely stay tuned and subscribe to the channel. But because of that C1 chip, the OLED tech, and then of course just the newness of the phone, it's going to be the best battery life in any 6.1-inch display, and if you compare the video playback kind of unit of measurement that Apple likes to use for their battery life, you get 26 hours of battery life on this new iPhone 16e versus 22 hours of battery life on the regular iPhone 16. So if battery life is of the utmost importance, then this one is going to have a little bit of a leg up versus the regular 16. And then I also did see that it's going to be just a little bit lighter in weight, so maybe we'll see the difference in the hand, but that remains yet to be seen. And then lastly, some other things to consider is going to be the charging. The wireless charging situation is something that's a little bit of a head scratcher for me because there is no MagSafe and there is no Qi 2, but there is wireless charging. So you get 7.5 watts of Qi wireless charging, but there is no way to use your MagSafe accessories. So if you currently use MagSafe accessories, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to use it unless you slap a case on it. And maybe Apple did this on purpose because the people that are upgrading to this phone aren't coming from a MagSafe iPhone. They're coming from an older iPhone like an iPhone 11, and that's why they continue to talk about that one because that one did not have MagSafe. Or maybe they're coming from an iPhone SE, so they're realizing that, hey, they're not going to use MagSafe, they don't have MagSafe accessories, they have nothing to quote-unquote be mad about if you don't include MagSafe, but we will upgrade it because the old iPhone SE didn't have wireless charging at all. And of course, there's going to be tons of case manufacturers. I've already seen some on Amazon, which I'll link below, that do have the MagSafe case for the iPhone 16e. So if you do have MagSafe accessories laying around, it will work with a case put on it. So again, from the beginning of my video, I challenge you to not look at this iPhone 16 as a newer iPhone SE, but look at it as a newer and more budget-friendly iPhone 16, because the 16e, that is what this is going to go for, and this is the type of customer that Apple wants to kind of attract. The people that maybe don't want to spend $800 for a brand new iPhone 16, but are okay spending $600 as long as they get maybe 90% of the same phone. Because think about it, you still get the nice USB-C, you still get a 48 megapixel shooter, you get an OLED display, you get the action button, you get the new design language, and you get Apple Intelligence, so there's a lot of good that comes with this phone at that $600 price point. But again, I can also see and sympathize and empathize with people thinking this is going to be a new $450 iPhone SE4 as opposed to an iPhone 16e. But let me know in the comment down below what you think. Is it going to be worth that $600 price point? Are you upset about that price point? Are you okay with it because you know that you're still saving $200 compared to the flagship iPhone 16? Let me know in the comment down below. Always curious to discuss, but that'll do it for this video. If you did make it to the end, leave a little dolphin. Let me know if you're picking up the iPhone 16e. And if you want to watch more videos like this one, check out one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando, and I'm out of here, everybody. Peace.